Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our GAA Coach webinar sessions. Tonight we have Tipperary hurling coach Eamon O'Shea, who's going to present to us on the topic of what is coaching. As many of you are already aware, Eamon is coach Tipperary senior hurling team. He has been both coach and manager and player previously. From Kilran McDonough's club originally, he's currently involved with the Salt Hill Club in Galway. Under his coaching, Tipperary have won National Hurling Leagues, Munster and All-Ireland title honours, and have been extremely successful over the last number of years. I know that there's a huge interest in Eamon's presentation this evening, and we have the highest number of people on the call ever so far at over 1,100. So what I'll do is I'll hand this over to Eamon. When Eamon has finished the presentation, we have some questions that have already been submitted by some of you guys already, and we'll work through some of those. If there are questions or comments that come to you as we go along, you have the Q&A box in front of you. So you'll see that it's a little speech bubble with a question mark into it. If you type in your question or comment into that, I'll be able to get that and be able to ask Eamon if we have enough at the end for all those questions. So Eamon, over to you.
Okay, thanks Peter. So welcome to everybody, and so it's a beautiful evening here in Galway, looking out over the Atlantic Ocean, but I suppose we'd like to be elsewhere. But tonight is, I just want to reflect a little bit, you know, on coaching, and I'm aware there's probably people on the call that are, you know, at various levels of coaching, people who maybe are not doing any hurling coaching, people who don't know, I mean, it's hurling coaching that I do, but some of the issues tonight will sort of cut across a lot of codes and so on, but it's really just some of my reflections on, you know, things I learned over a period. You know, I've been involved for over 40, 50 years playing coaching and so on. So it's it's reflection, and I'm quite also sure, you know, tonight that, you know, lots of things that I say will be known to you, and I'd say there'll be very little that won't be known to you. And I suppose it's just to raise some of these issues again, so that, you know, it's all part of sort of learning. And it's one thing I learned from the last couple of weeks here, the last 8 or 9 weeks from not being involved in activities, you know, the opportunity it gives you to reflect and sort of ask yourself questions about what you're doing yourself, not only in your hurling coaching or football coaching, but also, you know, what you're doing and so on. So, you know, I guess if the lockdown has one advantage, is it does give you a chance to step off the treadmill of work and so on, even though still working, but step off the sort of coaching treadmill and ask yourself some questions. So the night is reflection. So I'll talk for about 25 minutes or so, and then have some questions and answers. So I just titled it, what is coaching? And like all good talks, there won't be an answer to that at the end. So if you're looking for conclusions, there won't be that many. But I suppose the picture I have up is of a young fella, you know, from way back. And I suppose it does give the sense to me that kind of that expression, or that self-expression, that as coaches, you know, that when you see it in your players, and I wasn't coaching that young fella, but when you see it and you see the freedom and the, you know, the spirit in a young fella or young girl, and see that on a pitch, whether it's with a hurley or with a football or with a rugby ball or whatever ball, it is to me the kind of essence of what you want to get to, almost in your own coaching at some stage. If you can see your team, your adult team, whatever level they're at, having that kind of joy, I think, you know, whatever your results are, you probably are on the right way. So that's why that kind of photograph kind of appealed to me in some way, as being something that I keep in the back of my head about why this is important, way beyond outcome. And indeed, you know, we could have a philosophical debate here on what is outcome, whether and what it means. But I think that's why that picture appealed to me. I suppose one of the things that I've always felt as a coach and has been involved with teams, and is, you know, one of the things that I find that it's important is to sort of to reconcile the importance of the coach as being omnipresent, if you like, as being everywhere and anywhere and in players' heads And sometimes you find yourself, start of a session, and you have 10 things to do, and only 5 minutes to do them. You're bringing the balls, you're trying to control kids, you're lining the pitch, you're putting up goalposts, and then you're on the pitch, and you have to be everywhere at once. And it goes on as well when you go to adult, and you have to be in the players' heads in terms of trying to influence the way you play and the way you think about the game, the way you want the game to be played. And that's the kind of omnipresence I mean. It's a physical omnipresence, but it also a kind of a metaphysical omnipresence, if you like. And you often hear players when they talk about coaches or managers that they hear that voice, explaining the game or as being narrator of the game that goes on. But on the other hand, one of the things that's really important, I think, is for the coach to be almost invisible as well, that they take themselves out of the equation. Because one of the things certainly important to me is that, that really when the players go on the pitch, and way before they go on the pitch, they have to be good at making decisions themselves. Now that changes over time. Obviously, when you're starting in your nursery, you're not going to be giving decision-making powers to your players, but you are teaching them. But over time, gradually, up along the levels, you're giving more responsibility to your players, and you're becoming less visible. And I think it's that in a sense that reconciliation between that invisibility, that when you look at the play, that it's not you that's there, although you may have provided a framework, but it's there representing what the picture I showed first, that joy, that identity, authenticity, I don't know what you want to call it, there are different words for it, but it reflects a core element of, the way your club, your county, your whatever level you're at, the way you feel the game should be played. And so it's there, and you don't own it for sure. And you've probably made a really minor contribution to it. We all have just made contributions to it. It's a combination of different contributions. And in a sense, you can stand back and watch the game, and the game goes on. Now, you can not say you're not involved, and not to say you don't calculate and recalculate and reflect, but in a sense, once your players gets out on the pitch, it's not yours anymore. And I think that's really important, I think. And again, that's a viewpoint that I would have. So, and just I'm really not a great idea what the last slide means, actually. It's just a feeling that in a sense, to me, it always feels like get out of the way, your players. While at the same time, make sure and create the environment the way your players can play. And I think there is a really valid question mark as when that should start. You know what I mean? And I've taught it. Well, I haven't taught it actual nursing. I've taught it 8 years of age. I coach from upwards. So I'm not saying all this is the same all the way up, but it's a question of getting out of the way of the game. Being able to narrate the game. And I talk later about the grammar of the game. And this could apply. This not only applies to hurling. Maybe it's a question. It's a hypothesis. I mean, if there's people on from other sports, I really would be interested to see whether this applies across sports. But it's to get out of the way of your players, but yet provide them with the tools, the confidence, the trust, the belief that they can express themselves. And you know what? I suppose if you're teaching, or if you're a parent, or if you're just a mentor in some way to people, that's what you'd like to be as well, I think. So I guess the coach, or what is the coach's job anyway? And that's I suppose a big question, and and certainly one we're going to try. So what is your job? And this is only 3 points that I have. 3 points that I have. I mean, I'm sure there's job descriptions. I'm sure you get more elaborate job descriptions of what is your job. And I suppose they're in no order, 1, 2, 3. I don't improve the player is not necessarily the first thing, but I think I would always like to sort of say, well, how can you improve the player? How can you improve the team? And for me, part of it is teaching what I would call the grammar of the game. Now, every game is a different grammar, but it's a grammar I think you have to begin to learn. It helps if you've been, if you've been through the game in some way, not necessarily at the elite level. You don't have to be an intercounty player to be a really good coach. You don't even have to be a brilliant player to be a good coach. But it helps. It helps if you have some experience of playing the game. Now, that said, I think there are crossovers from games that can help, and also you can use your coaching credentials and your coaching structure to upskill on the game. So I don't think, for me anyway, there's no eliteness here. There's no elite structures that says, in a particular club, because you haven't, played for a team at a high level, that immediately rules you out. I certainly don't believe that in any shape or form. And nor do I believe that this is sort of gender specific. And I've seen it in my own club here in Salt Hill, Knocknacarra, where, there's been really strong leadership from women in the club at various stages. And so I think, teaching the grammar of the game is really important, but it doesn't necessarily start from, scratch or start from an elite level rather. So, but to me, it's about the player and it's about the team. And I think you as the coach then have to facilitate that and to teach that, to teach that. So keep that in mind. So what we do then is to teach that. So one of the things about the fundamentals of the game, or what are the essentials of the game, and so one player, I suppose, is how you grew up. I grew up in sort of black and white television, following Ajax in the European Cup and Johan Cruyff, and his book, on Cruyff. One of the things in there is the fundamentals for soccer. And sort of, I never played soccer, but do like watching football, and so. He talked about 5 basic skills, in soccer: shooting, heading, dribbling, passing, controlling the ball. Now, that's really important because they, to me, would be fundamentals that I would have done or tried as a kid, out the backyard playing football after watching Ajax or any of those teams as a young fella. And they're one level, they're incredibly basic, incredibly, learn to shoot, learn to head, learn to dribble, pass the ball, and sort of control the ball. And what Cruyff has a great line in his book, to be able to touch the ball perfectly once, you need to touch it 100,000 times in training. Now, I really love the ball, whatever it is, whether it's hurling or football, soccer, anything. I love the ball. The ball has to be central, and touching the ball and feeling the ball is really important. But I think as a coach, if I start like that and think, well, what are the fundamentals of this game? And how does it affect me? How does it make me feel? How does it make me understand? How does it make me one with myself? How does it make me feel creative? How does it make me feel good? I see it in hurling teams that have been involved in. If you give them a ball, that's all they want. Whether they're elite intercounty players, they're trying to put sidelines over, they're trying to hit crossbars, they're trying to have fun games. This is the essence of the sort of, in a sense, we as coaches have to remember that what you're trying to create is something long lasting. Not every one of your players, and very few of your players will go on to play elite sport, but they'll all go on to have an understanding of the game and it stays with them. And I think all the better if you can create the sort of fundamentals. And that's why Cruyff influenced a lot of interesting managers, including Guardiola and people like that, and Barcelona and so on like that, which, you may not have an interest in soccer at all, to know that a certain genre, a certain understanding of how the game, a certain belief in how the game should be played. And it goes back to these fundamentals, to be able to touch the ball perfectly. And I would say in any sport, in football, when I see Gaelic football, and I see a player kicking a ball, I see, for example, a team like Corofin, one of the players kick the ball. I look at that and say, there's a kick that's been done a lot of times for it to reach where they want it to reach. So really, to really understand about what are the essentials. And for me, I call it hurling grammar because, I was used to, in the old days, sort of grammar was really important. It doesn't seem to be important as much nowadays. Especially looking at the way some of my students write, but it is really important. And for me, and I think Martin Forty covered some of it off, I think last Monday week, and Damien Coleman last night as well. Some of the things that I would consider to be critical, not only for if you're beginning in a, you're beginning in your nursery, or with your under 9 boys or girls, or whatever, your minor team, your junior hurling team, your senior club team, but I would also go back up to county level. You'd be, people often say to me, well, what is it like? County training must be very different. It is, in a sense, that players have are at elite level, but a lot of the times you want to think about these 6 elements in my part, and I think Martin calls it a magnificent 7. I kind of aggregated, but a lot of the things that he covered, I would have covered. I cover here, and I'm not going to go through these because this isn't a hurling seminar, and you've already had it anyway, those who are interested. But it goes back to, for me, striking is really, really critical in the game, in the same way as Cruyff talked about kicking. Football, really is important, and that begins, I think, very early on with not running before you can walk. So if I'm in my nursery and if I'm up along a few years, make sure your players can strike the ball on the ground. I really feel that kind of touch, the kind of relationship with the ball. That's why I said earlier, the fundamental relationship is with the ball, between the ball and the hurley. Football, between your foot and the ball, and all of those senses kick in over time, and that kind of feel is really important. So the striking, and for me, I think we'll talk about later on, the sound, so important to make you understand where your strike is and how your strike is. So I would still spend a lot of time with whatever team thinking about striking, and making sure that people understood that importance. And part of the thing is sort of, and catching them being so important. And the great thing about some of these is they are multi-dimensional, in the sense that you can learn the skills involved in catching from allowing your players, and particularly if you have young kids, to allow them to do other sports and other activities, to allow them flexibility and agility, and playing, just normal playing, to make sure they can catch, but spend also some time with catching. And then with your stick work for hurling, it's really important that relationship, and the gift of touch with between hand and hurl and brain, and that kind of softness and lightness of touch. I think this is what Lancador wrote about, the incredible lightness of being, and to me that's what really is the relationship between the player and the hurley. That kind of touch. Knowing when to do that, and so the catching is really important. Stick work, and different balance, different position, body position. All of those critical skills that you can learn over the winter in your when you're inside in the hall, about how you get how you impact your center of gravity, how you're approaching the ball, how you position, how you actually get to face the ball, when you have it. All of those things are part of that stick work, and how you start with 2 hands and go to 1 hand, and how you challenge, and those increasing challenges, and how but again, it begins with ground hurling, then sort of hand pass and so on. I'm not going to go through all these. The shooting is really important, because I'm always amazed that people don't spend more shooting, because the objective for me is to score more than the opposition, and I suppose that one of the things we probably could do more of is to keep making sure our accuracy, our execution, and our shooting. But we can't do any of that, of course, if we can't strike well. We can't do it if we can't catch well. We can't do it if it's stick work. So there is a kind of sequential, and the proper coaches on this webinar would know much more about me than how to actually do that, how to actually develop from one stage to another. But it is important, this kind of shooting, that execution, and so on, and to give players responsibility all over the pitch. I don't believe, for example, in my backstone shoot, I don't encourage it, but I do encourage them to learn and to get into positions where they can shoot. Because one of the things about your players, I think you need to be always remember is, you shouldn't limit creativity to, the three guys on your inside forward line. Creativity is a sense of ownership within the team. And if your cornerback, your goalkeeper doesn't have it, it's unlikely you're going to have the end result at the other end of the pitch. Anyway, that's a deviation. But I think one of the parts as well is part of the grammar as well, and how all this connects and how you, because, I suppose one of the things about it's important is that as you go up the line in your coaching, once you get your fundamentals right of how to hold the hurley, strike the ball on the ground, lift the ball, strike the ball in the air, catch the ball. So once you've gone through that process, there comes a stage where then you have to connect between the players, and that's part of the development, obviously, of the team element of your three objectives I started with. How you connect the players and how you begin to make them, it begins to be, a part of one process, and that connections are really important all over the pitch. An example would be, for example, distances between players and optimal distances, and all of that's important later on for support play, for where you want to create openings, where you want to close down openings. Now, you don't set it up like this. This happens over a long period. And I suppose I should say that one of the things that I think is really important is to have a lot of patience. This is a long game. So, if you have a team for a year, it's unlikely you're going to get where you want them to be. If you only have them for a year, you hand them on at juvenile level to the next person who will then develop them further. So this is a really long game. So don't be beating yourself up over, over maybe after a year, you can only see minimal progress. This happens over time. So give yourself a long period here, and you may not be at the end of the process or anywhere near the end of the process, but you've made a really important contribution, I think, to the whole process. So connectivity between players, between positions, I suppose that goes as well. If your young lads are playing a match under 9 or under 10, and it's changed now, for the better, where we're not that interested if we win the under 10 championship, or we're not. In fact, there's probably no under 10 championship, but we're not interested anymore. But I think it goes up to under 14 level, where I'm more interested in where a player is standing, how a player is attacking the ball, where they're connected to their fellow players, than I am what's happening at the other end, or how many goals you're conceding. And and believe me, I've been on teams where I've managed and coached teams that have been conceding a bit. So, but I say to people, be more concerned about how the players are evolving and developing, and it's a slow process. So the grammar of the game, and we could spend all night on that, but I'm not going to. So, but the grammar is important for planning your session. Unless you have that idea in your head as to know, what really is important tonight. What do I think? Having discussed it with the coaches, or having discussed it, as you're an adult player with the senior players, and say, look, and I would often do this, look, I'm not happy with our striking. Am I missing something, or are you happy with it? And then do we do a little bit more on it? And I'm not saying you do that with your under 10s or under 11s, but you need to talk to your fellow coaches. You need to look down the line and say, what's our striking like with the teams coming behind? What's our striking like with teams that have gone forward? And you need that information for planning your session. If you need a module on hand passing, put a module of hand passing in. If you need a module on, and a stick work does include, by the way, batting and flicking away and hooking, and I include all that under stick work. But anyway, we're not going into that tonight. But if you do need a module on that, get a module into your coaching on it. And if you're having doubts, one of the things I would really encourage you to do, because we learn so much, not only from within our own ranks, within our own club, but looking at matches and seeing, what the better teams are doing, and also from other sports, that, ask people, what do you think we're lacking there? So, and the consistency of the message as well. I mean, I think the players need to know, not necessarily the plan, but they need to know that what's in their interests and so on like that, and how they're developing. And it doesn't have to be very formalized. You don't have to take out a print off every week and say, no, you've improved this much today, that much. I'm not talking about anything like that. But the consistency of our coaching message. If, for example, you believe you should, in developing two sides very early on, that should be a consistent message. So even though, there's frustration if you have players in a match saying, you must develop your weaker side, and there's frustration, even though there is frustration and people are learning, you must have that consistency. This is an important part of the grammar of the game. And you must have also intuition of what's needed and when. That's really important for you to sort of reflect on that and say, what are we lacking? Maybe I need to spend more 10 minutes before the training starts, and we need to do some stand-up play on hooking, for example. And so that's the intuition and for the development, and some sort of measurement of your sessions. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has the time, after a session, but I do think you need to have to go back to what you think is the important part of the grammar of the game and see, are you meeting those? Have you forgotten any? Are there things you need to do? And then work it through. So that's why I think all that's important, and I think we need to build, essentially going back, because I really want to emphasize for people tonight at various levels. You'd be surprised how basic training is at inter-county level sometimes, and that's not one of my county coaches, but you'd be surprised how much effort we have to put into sort of making sure that the basic grammar is correct. So, this is worth doing at that level. So just before we go into some of the things, just to remind ourselves, I think that if you're lucky, this is what a team coaching framework requires, I think. An ambitious culture. Now, that ambitious culture may not be to win the county cup or to win the All-Ireland, although it does get a little bit outcomes driven when you get elite level. But, an ambitious culture is a culture where we want to get better. This is what defines us, and so on. And I do think there has to be a kind of overarching philosophy around whatever level we're at, and I have to say I've coached at all levels. I've coached at a level where, there was very little chance of success, and I've coached at a level where there was a high chance of success. But that ambitious culture is part of it, and I think you have to decide what you want to happen here. And there are multi-dimensional aspects of that culture. Part of it is certainly an enjoyable and fun environment. That this is good fun. And fun is not just fun as in, anybody can do what they want. Very often your players, will want some sort of competitive element to it. If you put kids without a coach in there, there's always competition in it at some level. But I think it's to make it enjoyable and to make it different and to make it innovative and to have that take out that sameness from it and let that picture we had at the start, maybe of that kind of, achievement, whatever that achievement is, and it'll differ across players. You know what I mean? You're going to have many, many different types of players, and really important, I think, to remember that. And one of the things we can give for free as coaches, as well as developing technical aspects, we can give praise for free. If a guy or a girl, is dropping the ball 99 times out of 100, make sure you see the ones that are not dropped. Because, although they may not go on and maybe ever play in the club, I think it's really important that people in an environment see themselves as being achievement in some way, you know what I mean? And it's not to be frivolous or in a sense to patronize in that way. It's to be, reflective of allowing that human experience of achievement. And that, so part of the growth mindset then is, I suppose, again, it's what you define it. And I can't define this for clubs or coaches. And what do you see as a growth mindset in terms of what you're doing? Are players getting better? Are things improving? Are you setting goals that are manageable and achievable? Are you when you achieve those goals, are you making sure that that's seen as success? Are you reflecting and going back and saying, you know, we have to do better? Are you creating around a set of, resilience and sort of, these words are, I know, sometimes hard to define, character building and so on. But, look, I'm sure you stood in the sideline at half time and, you're down a lot. And, you have two choices. You can rail against the world, or you can say, listen, look, that didn't go well. Now we have to try to get better, and you have to try to give them some way that they can get better immediately, even if it's only marginal, and then some way after that where they can say, look, we did improve from that day. And look, that's what it is. That's what it is, for all of us. Wherever you are, you're trying really to push the boundaries of that growth mindset and starting again, no more than the situation we're in at the moment, where it's a really difficult situation. We need to stay in the here and now, which is a hard job to do, and really seek to improve things for ourselves and those nearest to us and our communities. Look, that to me is the only way to deal with the situation that I'm in. But at the same time, we have some longer term goal, and we look forward to the day when things improve, and it's not just mindless, hapless kind of hoping. It's saying, this day will come, and when it comes, I'm really looking forward to that. So you're casting your horizon maybe in the very long term, but you're ready for it. But you really do live, and no more so on the coaching pitch. You do live in the here and now. That consistent outlook is really important. I think, if you change your mind every day and changing your coaching philosophy every day, I'm not sure players will think, well, what does he or she believe in here really? And, I'm not saying you don't change and recalibrate. You'd be stupid if you didn't. I think there's John Maynard Keynes, the great British economist, who sort of introduced sort of expansionary fiscal policy after the Second World War. Somebody said to him once, you've changed your mind there, and he says, well, what do you do, sir, when you get more data? And this is, sometimes you're always looking for more data that helps you change your mind. So part of the issue here is to sort of also, for me, team sports is a collective philosophy. You have to give up a lot for the collective, and they're the connections I spoke about earlier, this kind of relationships within a team, outside a team, and part of your ongoing teaching is that collectivity and the importance of that collectivity for the group, and encouraging it, while at the same time allowing ego and allowing that creativity. I wouldn't dream of, trying to take away that creativity, but it must be done within the collective. And, I remember one game where somebody asked me afterwards, I think we scored 2 goals or 3 goals, and somebody said, and what did you think of the third goal? And I said, who scored it? And I didn't see who scored the goal, and I don't really care who scores them. And I think if you get your team thinking about just the collective, I think it's a really important part of, again, why we're involved and building that sense of whatever we're, and again, we're only the water, literally the water carrier within our clubs, within our communities. We're one cog in this machine, in this community effort, I guess, a club effort. But it's really important that we sort of build that philosophy, and that goes back as a coach, I think, to making sure you're not the most visible person on the park. And I think it's really important. I think I'm going too slow here and talking too much. That's why you should never give me the airwaves. So what do you need to understand? And so that's just 5 points. That's all to go. 5 points. What do you need to understand as an individual, in my view? And again, these are just personal views. I don't have a theoretical framework here, so I know I was on these webinars, and there are certainly a lot of people I heard who were really good at understanding theoretical aspects of sport. I do enough of that in my day job, and so what you're getting from now is experiential. It's not. I don't have the theory here, but I do point to 5 points here, which certainly on reflection, think are important. Pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching, and I go through each of these. So that's how you teach, what you teach, and that you have to be aware that there are different types of learning, and you have to be able to, in some way, incorporate those in the way you coach. I think observation still matters. Like I know what data did to what Billy Bean did to data, and the power of data, and so much data we get now. So I'm talking about observation of data, but I'm also talking about observation of human beings, because at the end of the day, data is really important, and I would stand over that professionally and sports wise, but also your observation of the human element of what's going on in front of you. The role of intensity, and I think one of the things is that your play has to have intensity, not your whole session, because you can't have an intensive 50-60 minute session where you're driving your players on the whole time, but little bouts of intensity are really important, particularly at the adult level. The balance between structure and chaos is also important, because structure is really important for learning, but chaos is equally important, particularly as you go older. And it's also important when you're younger. When I go in and see them, Salt in that car down here coaching lads in the nursery, and sometimes they're inside an involved basketball arena. And I remember when my own kids are small, but even going in recently, and it's pure bedlam, and it's pure chaos, and it's great fun, and you're trying at the same time to teach something as the chaos goes on. But out of chaos we were born, and out of chaos we'll return. And going back then to your ability to adapt. And I suppose one of the things I really enjoy coaching is the fact that sometimes you have to do it on the fly. You have to change. You're at a session and you're looking at the pitch and you're looking at the mood and you're thinking this needs to change. And so I think don't forget sometimes we have to be adaptive. So maybe just briefly run through each of these. I think the second point there, messages have to be in many different ways. People learn in different ways, and what works for some won't work for others. The collective talk before the session. I've learned over the years that I'm not sure anybody listens, particularly at junior level. You know what I mean? You're there giving your carefully thought out speech, and some fellas looking out the window. In fact, most fellas when I used to do it would be looking elsewhere. But so you have to deliver the manuscripts, and I really, I suppose, learned over the years. I suppose I learned it from more so when I was doing a bit of work in NUI Galway, and maybe working with, not only when I was coaching with the Fitzgibbon team, but sort of one-on-one with a lot of different players over the years from many different counties. And you'd have a chat with them, and the biggest kick you'd get is the conversation with them. And so I think at an individual level, it's really important you find the time to touch base with your players individually, because collective messages are important, particularly on structure and so on, but individual messages are also important. So it's important we do that. And even more important is that over time, and again over time, I'm not suggesting this for your underage, but as you get older, allowing players or asking players, you won't get an answer straight away from a minor team. What do you think? What do you think we're doing wrong? Or you'll only get the guy who has a confidence to talk. But I think you have to maybe allow them the opportunity to dwell on a question, and maybe not even answer it. Maybe come back to it then individually. Allowing your players to think, and why aren't we doing this right? And where are we not connecting? Where are we too far apart from each other? Why is the ball not going into areas that we've opened up, and so on? And it's really important that you begin that process, not, as I said, not at an early stage. And certainly I would say, underage up to under 16 minor. But, and again, not in any, I'm not talking about an hour seminar now before a game. I'm talking about little bits and pieces of insertions where you might say to them, listen, we need to think about this. Come back to me the next day if you've thought about it. One or two might have done it, and and I'm also a great believer nowadays. WhatsApp groups. Now, luckily, I'm not on any WhatsApp group because I can't handle the technology, but they do tell me that WhatsApp groups where players talk a lot. So I say to them, well, if you're talking a lot, why don't you talk about the game, particularly? And how don't you talk about how you relate to each other and what kind of ball you like and so on like that? So there's plenty of fora now on social media to allow people to talk about the thing they love doing. And, they love playing hurling, football, soccer. So why not talk about it? Now, you may have as coach to correct them. As Brian Clough famously said, what do you do if somebody doesn't agree with you? Well, I listen to him for 20 minutes and then I tell him, well, it's going to be done my way. There's a little bit of that as a coach. Sometimes you have to say, well, that's very good, but, we're still doing it this way, or thanks for that, we'll insert that here, and so on. So, it's giving them some element of control. Sometimes less is more. I believe that really. So your wall ball session needs to be shorter. I use that as a rule of thumb from some of the experience. My wall ball sessions just feel too long, particularly when they're doing it on their own. Get quality all the time, and your sessions probably need to be shorter. Again, I'm not talking to anybody in particular. I'm probably talking about myself. I do have to have somebody, because I don't wear a watch. I do have to have somebody telling me when I'm gone over time, wherever I'm coaching. So I think but sometimes less is definitely more. The power of the senses, I really strongly believe this, that to me it's a game, whatever game you play, it's a game of the relationship with the ball, to go back to my original point. And that relationship is no more so than any of our relationships, whether it's with food or other people. It's to do with the senses. And I think we need to have that through our game and to encourage people to do that. And I suppose flow is really important. And this Wayne Gilbert, I think the last couple of weeks, was talking about flow and so on like that, really interesting, and that challenge, allowing people to creativity. And look, allow your cornerbacks to be creative. We want the ball back. So when you make a tackle to win a ball on the cornerback line, now you're on. Now the goal is on. Now it's your creation. And I think it's important that everybody feels the creativities. And I think I said that earlier. The wonder of the ball is still the wonder of the ball to me, and that sound, when I hear somebody when I watch Joe Canning, see him strike a ball or hear him strike a ball, to me, that is still a wonder of the game, and I would have always said to the lads here in Galway, to watch, to listen and hear that relationship. To me, that is still a wonder of the game, and I think it's to allow that relationships to blossom. I'm not sure. Yeah. So next one is observation. As I said earlier, observation. I think watch, and I have a lot of watches here, but watch again and watch when intensity comes, see what happens. We're watching your players, and that's also watching, for example, when you're young and you're in the nursery and there's a girl or a boy maybe outside the loop, maybe not participating. That's when you need your coaches around you. That's when you need a really supportive environment to make sure that person is involved, that person feels valued, that person feels wanted, that person has a technical issue that you can go do it one-on-one. All of that watching, and that you're not so involved in the whole shebang, and it is madness and mayhem, of course, we know this, that you're watching to see. It's the same level, when you're on an adult team, for example, your junior team or your senior club team, and you're looking and you're seeing a player, and they may not be themselves, and we can't solve everything as coaches, but sometimes we're in the privileged position of being able to see people at play and see maybe that they're not themselves and so on like that, and we then need to be aware, have awareness and so on like that. So make sure you're watching as well as it's a hard thing to do. I find that the hardest, to make sure that because you can go through a session sometimes somebody asks them, was player X there, and you say I can't remember, and yet it might be really important that you remember. So but that's when your back room and your support your support coaches come into play. You know, never get isolated as a coach. Never have people around you that really you depend on and that you give responsibility to and you give power to. I think it's really important because we need a lot of people to allow us to get that going. But all those observations afterwards, there's kind of self-explanatory, but you know, some players when the intensity comes, they'll behave better than others. And they're the players, I'm talking about elite level, they're the players, you know, when intensity comes that you know that they're ready. When pressure comes, some players are better than others, you know, but you can then help that player deal with pressure. You can talk them through that pressure of a game or when intensity comes. And then when the wins and losses come, you know, and, you know, there are different things. When wins come, you know, you try to build on them. When losses comes, you try to learn from them. But it's also vice versa. When wins comes, you have to learn too. And when losses come, they're not always what they're made out to be. Sometimes you lose, and actually there's very little wrong with it, and therefore you have to build from that. You know, and I've been in situations when you get multiple losses, and you think the world is ending, and it's hard to reconcile with what you're seeing on the pitch. And then you really try to have to come to the fore in creating that confidence and that belief, you know, that things will turn right again. You know, because, you know, remember, regression to the mean is a really important point, you know, that, you know, you're never so good as you probably think you are because you've after won the last 5 games, and you're never so bad because you've lost the last 5 games. And if you're regression to the mean, will probably tell you somewhere you are. And you really try to make it marginal gains around that, you know. So you really are trying to, and watch when praise comes. And I go back to the point that I would really, you know, really feel that for young players in particular, you know, I think it's important you find the good bits in them, you know, even when you're tearing your hair out. To find it, and you know, and I look at all the coaches I had when I was playing. I'm sure that trying to find something to say sometimes was quite difficult, but thankfully, you know, I've influenced by really good coaches. So I think, and remember, I don't know who said it, but it's an important point. That they'll remember more how you made them feel than whether you won or lost, and making a person feel like is a really important part. And similarly, when criticism comes, and this suppose happens at a, you know, nowadays, you know, criticisms can come even from club games and elite level through inter-county games, and you know, shielding people from that and allowing people, you know, to make mistakes is a really important part of their growth process. It's not that everybody can succeed, not everybody can become an elite player. But I think you can make sure that critique is fine, but I think you have to be really careful with criticism comes. But observation is really important. Right? So one part of the intensity that's really important, I think, is bring yourself to the pitch. You know, the way I coach, or you know, everybody else's coach is going to be different. I don't think it helps to compare yourself with another coach, or who is the top coach, who is a great coach, who isn't this. You have to bring yourself to the pitch, and particularly not some composite coaching manual. You know, they rise on the pitch with so many ideas that it's very difficult. Go back to the grammar of the game. Go back to what you think makes the game good. Go back to the ball and go back to the senses with that ball. So I think it's, you know, well, and I've always felt, you know, listening to a talk like this, you know, you hear a coach talking about this, you think, oh, that's interesting. And I think that's how you should reflect on this. No, I don't agree with that. I think that's interesting, because by and large, you're looking to learn, but you're not looking to become that coach. And, you know, I've certainly been influenced by buckets of coaches from various sports, and, you know, I've been influenced by literature and fiction on the way I approach coaching. But, you know, and I don't know, you know, all of that adds up that I couldn't say, you know, but who was the biggest influence per se. But I do know that I had to try to make sense of it, for good or bad. And I think that's really important, not to be doing yourself down either. in saying, you know, you have an approach and it's valued. You know, I see coaches down here in Salt Hill, you know, really doing really good work. For example, you know, bringing themselves onto the pitch and trying to make the players better. And it's really, you know, looking in and it's really good to see. So I'd also see that, you know, I'd also think that I've always felt that at a level, now this is a competitive level, for example, now, I'm not talking about at juvenile level necessarily, but I think you should always look at what the best clubs are doing and see, can you bring yourself up to that. But I always try to train at especially at a competitive level, to try to play the best team in the competition, identify who they are, identify what we have to do. But I'd also say that you can't allow your standards to slip, and it's sort of, and I think that, you know, you should never underestimate and always show respect, and you know, that you don't drop your standards. That goes back to what environment you want to create. It's a growth mentality, you know. So when you play the best and you lose, and when you play the worst and you win, you're still looking for gains, marginal gains. The intensity is injecting match pace into sessions. I think whether it's a 10 or 15 minute or 20-minute insert, this is when you're really rolling up, when you really take it up, and everybody's on, and everybody knows they're on. And I think then sometimes you can judge at that level, whatever level you're playing, you know, playing for the junior championship, and you're looking, hey, let's do 20 minutes now when we're injecting high level activity into this session, and you're really pushing the players, the final point, and the balance between a high level of challenge and the player's ability to reach it. You're pushing your players, whether you know, to be the best, to have that sort of tension between challenge and enjoyment. And really that's the utopia, if you like. That's the bliss point in your session at whatever level, where everybody is on a high in trying to reach that level. If it goes too much, you go over the limit. If it's not challenging enough, you know, you're not developing. So, and that's kind of the flow element to it that coaches all over the world talk about, you know. But it does need to be in our sessions. Again, I'm talking more of at the competitive adult level. But you know, it's similarly the challenge when you're on a pitch with young fellas or young girls, and you're trying to get to the point where, you know, you're doing a piece of work where you want to bring challenge. Don't be afraid to bring challenge. Don't be afraid to get outside the comfort zone, because they want that challenge. You just have to be careful you're not pushing them too hard above the challenge. But I would really encourage it at all levels. That bliss point is at elite level, but it's also at juvenile level, where you're trying to encourage that challenge and you're pushing them to the limits. Not everybody will reach those limits, and then you go back to the individual level and you try to up the level and so on at individual level. But this is an important part of getting better, I think. And part of it then is structure and chaos. And you know, I suppose, you know, this depends on your preferences. You know, some people are very good structural, and I learned so much from good structural coaches who are managers at elite level, who are really incredibly good at structure and so on. And I've learned an awful lot from looking and watching at them. And it's good for technical development of the player, because you have to have structure in how they approach the ball. You know, your 2x2s, your 1-1 facing 1. You can do so much structural stuff. Your tactical development, you know, can be really helpful by structure and so on like that. But chaos is also essential, you know, because chaos brings challenge. When you're, you know, and for me it's always helpful, and then this is just for me, it's very helpful to me to go into situations where I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. Because if I don't know what I'm going to do next, they certainly don't know what I'm going to do next. And therefore it brings an added degree of uncertainty, and uncertainty is where the player can flourish and solving their own problems. Okay, you have a structure, and you're not saying that everybody's going around doing their own thing. But I think one of the things that chaos can provide is it allows leadership and allows ownership. And not to be underestimated at any level is, again, the most important people are the players who must take a challenge when it's presented on a pitch. You know, if you have to go from 15 to 14 players or 15 to 13 players, or if you have to deal with many different systems and so on, you know, I think the days of the players looking to you on the line, you know, I think you haven't really been working hard enough on the coaching field if you have to solve the problem, you know. And you know, I know that popular media like to think the, you know, the guru coach is there or the guru manager is there thinking this happens and so on like that. But managers and coaches are important, but it's probably done off the pitch or off the game, and then it's the players who take ownership of it. And I do think a little bit of chaos in your training. Don't be afraid of it, I would say. And you know, if the players trust you, and if the players feel, if you have the players' confidence, and if they know that you have their back, and that you're trying to make them good players or better players at whatever level you're at, they'll probably they'll certainly, rather than probably, give you a break and allow you an odd mistake. You know, God knows you've given them, you know, you allow them a fair few mistakes, so they owe you one. So don't be afraid of that chaos. And nearly done now. One more to go. So adaptability. I think for adaptability, you need to coach on the fly. And this is really important. Is you need to carry the game in your head. Now that doesn't mean, as I said at the start, you have to be an all-seeing, all-knowing, you know, person who's been steeped in the game for 30, 40 years, or my age, where you've gone through so many games you can't remember the games. But you have to carry some of the game in your head, you know, and your head can't be cluttered. You know, your head can't be, you've got to free up your head to be cluttered and just concentrate on what is important here. It's like making decisions. What is important? It's like, as I said, now, what is important now in my life under lockdown? Again, it's living in the now and addressing what's in front of me now, and making sure the people around me now are that we're working well together. And that grammar has to be the forefront of your mind. So go back to your grammar: striking, catching, stick work. You know, whether if it's football, it's kicking, passing. You know, above all, for me, going around in my head, it's that connectivity, how we connect, where we connect, and so on like that, and having that sort of thing all the time to your forefront. But that still means that you'll have to react to the section that it involves. You know, how many of us have gone down where our energy are low, or the team's energy are low, the tempo is low, the accuracy, the passing is low. So you feel like tearing your head out. So you know, your first reaction, certainly my first reaction would have been, you know, my voice gets louder. I'm now shouting at the player. I'm now shouting at everybody. And then I think to myself, well, hold on a second now. You're the ringmaster here. If you don't change it here, you know, it can't be always then. So it must be something I'm doing, and that's when the learning happens. You know, and you won't have patience every night. So nobody's asking you to be saintly here, but in a sense, what you try to do is you try to react, and then you try to deviate. And very often, deviation means shortening the session for me, or it means doing something interesting and doing something fun, and doing something out of the ordinary, and doing something, you know, allowing them to try something extraordinary, you know, at minor level. Let's do the fun things they like doing, you know. If that's soloing in and scoring goals, hey, I do that. If that's changing the atmosphere, do it. Tweaking is always good, because, you know, when you tweak, when you have to think when you're under most pressure, that's when the innovation occurs. And you want your players innovating, don't you? You know, you want your players innovating, and therefore, you know, that tweak is to allow them the opportunity, you know, and when it happens that you call it out, you know, and really important, very often, you know, something will break down, and, you know, the players solve that know why it's broken down faster than you. And very often, for certainly my experience anyway, at all levels, you know, sometimes, you know, I train minor team, you know, they look at you and they obviously know that what you've said is just completely off the wall, you know, and yet they find themselves a way to say, I think this is what he meant. And you're looking at it and thinking, well, it wasn't exactly what I meant, but actually it's much better than what I meant. So let's run with that. you know, and I think it's the confidence to say, hey, you don't know everything, and they're the lads that have to solve it anyway. Asking them also helps. I would be a great believer in just trying to figure out from as wide a variety as player as possible, you know, is this working or is that working? And I think you can start that process relatively young, at a relatively young age. You can start that process, you know, not at your nursery level, but you can start that process, as I said earlier. But it does need to happen at adult level. You know, and again, you're not asking everybody to come in an open forum, 2-hour meeting. I don't believe in any of that stuff. But I do believe in getting feedback from your player-led group, you know, your management, or your forum of the players, but also at an individual level. And reflection is always helpful. You know, reflect. And did that work? Did that work? What can I do better? And I said, go back and turn your observation, whether you win or lose. It's all about reflection. You know, and making sure that, you know, in a setup that if you're coach and you're not manager, that you're making sure that your work fits in with the manager, your work fits in with the other coaches. It's you know, that you understand what the ethos and philosophy behind the team is, your club is, you know, if it's a county level, if it's a, you know, elite club level, that you understand where your work fits in, because, you know, your work, as I said, is part of a body of work that goes on within a team, but also outside the team, with players coming from different age groups up to you or different clubs within a county. And I think that understanding is really important for you to get that whole. So reflection, I wouldn't overdo it, you know, because you know, ultimately trust is really important. So, and I hear you all say, thank God, the conclusion. So you have to put a conclusion on top here, because I told you at the start there's no conclusion. But I would say that for me, excitement is a great thing around the session. You know, so it's a run of the middle session on a Tuesday night. There's not a game for ages. If you bring excitement that Tuesday night, I will tell you, you'll get it back in spades. So excitement and challenge around the game, and it does lead to excellence. Now, some nights it's not going to work. Some nights, you know, with your best will in the world, you have the energy, and your team have the energy, and your people around you. But I would say part of the thing then is coach for enjoyment. You know, somebody might say, well, you know, what advice would you give to a coach? Coach for enjoyment. If you don't enjoy coaching, you know, then there's other roles you can play, really good roles. If it's not for you, you know, if you get too frustrated and so on like that. Patience is really, as I said, a strong virtue. Coach for enjoyment. Once you stop coaching for enjoyment, it's time, you know, to go, I think. Go back to the original point, and I think really where we started. Go back to the grammar of the game. The grammar of the game is really what you've got to protect, and you have to believe in it. And you have to have fundamentals before. You have to walk before you can run, in whatever sport it is. And even when you're running, you've got to go back to those fundamentals. And all the greats at all sport levels, and I'm watching Michael Jordan at the moment on The Last Dance, and being completely awed by his prowess, athletic prowess, and so on, and how to do that when there's so much noise around you. And but you know, he had the basic skills, developed the basic skills. You could see the evolution of the player into the superstar, you know, through an attachment to excellence. I'm going to use that example because it's fresh in my mind, but you know, to see the work and to see how much the craft of the game still mattered amid all the noise that he was hearing, and you know, how he could manage to move from that noise and that mayhem, and then be so attached to the craft of the game, the grammar of that basketball game. Really inspiring for a coach to look at. Building confidence and character, you know, it is really important. Part of the job we do. We don't always succeed. I certainly haven't succeeded. You know, there are players that I'm sure would say to you, that I didn't build their confidence enough, and so on like that. And look, life, you're always not going to achieve what you want to achieve, but you're always trying to build that confidence and supporting environment, and an element of making sure also that the game is only part of what they are. It's really important as coaches that we only see one facet of our lives, and that's a really important facet for us as coaches in the game, whatever game we are. But there's a whole other element of their lives that we have to make sure that they value, and I think that to me is also important. That in the exchanges that we have, that we also build maximum confidence in as far as we can. We have a very short period with players, so we can't do everything. But as coaches, I think we can help. We can make sure that people have a huge value on themselves, even when maybe things aren't going right on the pitch and so on like that. And finally, let your players play. And that's a hard thing to do, because you spend so much thinking about the game and wanting the game to be played perfectly. And sometimes, if I'm on the pitch myself, I feel, a player has the ball and I want him to give the ball in a particular direction, and they give it in another direction. Even when they're right, I feel they should have given it in the direction I wanted to give them. Even when the facts are contradicting me, so I have got to say, no, actually the player was right. Their instinct, their intuition is much better than what I saw, and they have to make decisions in real time. You have the ability to be outside. You have the luxury of being outside the game. They don't. So really, you have to be incredibly trusting and incredibly forgiving, especially to yourself, because you get so many things wrong. And finally, just a picture from maybe 15 years ago. Maybe all those guys are, I don't know, but it's a picture I like. Just sort of quickly. Finally, I think worry less about winning. That's a picture from maybe 12 or 15 years ago. All those guys are adults now and girls. That didn't look good, but I tell you, we actually won. I think that semi-final. But it's worry less about winning, and don't sort of beat yourself up. It's a game for fun, and it's a game for development. So that's it. Peter, I'll hand back to you.
Eamon, thanks so much. We've had a world of questions coming in and a world of questions in advance, and if it's okay, we might stay for another 10 minutes or so for a few,
yeah.
if that's okay with you and our audience as well. Just for people to know that we are recording the session, so it'll be available afterwards on the GAA Learning YouTube account, and the presentation is also available now on the GAA Learning webpage, the same one that you registered for this session. Eamon, invariably when your sessions are when you're involved in delivering sessions, people talk about forward play and movement. Can you tell us maybe what's your thoughts and attitudes towards maybe the structured and unstructured elements of forward play?
Well, much less than my role is much less than what people would be led to believe. Sometimes people ascribe things to me that I hadn't even thought of myself. So it's important to state that at the outset. As a coach, that people say, how did you do that? And I would say, well, I actually didn't do that. That's how the players interpreted what they felt they should do. So again, you can help players to think about that connections we talked about earlier. You can start that at an early age. You can even start it, I'm not saying early juvenile age. You can start from the age of 14 up and allow players, a lot. For example, a lot of them can do indoor over winters. About maybe start getting players in position and allow them to walk into other spaces and how spaces open up and what they would do then and where the ball should go and so on like that. So it doesn't have to be done in the summer. It can be done in the winter, where you ask players to think about their movement and so on like that. And then what happens when they move, and what then should happen in a connective sense with the players nearest to them, and what should happen at the other end when backs get the ball, when they see that movement, where the ball should be. And then it can gradually change or develop up to adult level, where you're looking to bring that into your match, and you're looking to build that into matches but it's a part of that connectivity, much more practical nowadays. And I think if you see some of the matches that TG4 have on now, you can see the evolution of the game from being, certainly when I was playing, the ball was hit fairly quick, and to just, you had to contest and that's it. Nowadays, if you look at the structured way the game is playing, spaces are opening up and players are making runs and so on like that, and it's much more developed. So I think all teams are at this kind of connectivity and forward play, but it's also allowing that creativity, as opposed to permeate along the whole pitch. Gone are the days like when the cornerback or the goalkeeper were not seen as part of the offensive game, the attacking game. So it's really allowing players to do that. So I think all teams nowadays are trying to see how they do that. But again, it's trusting your players and allowing them to reflect on that then.
And again, we've had a lot of questions from participants about the opposite end, the defensive end, and trying to overcome systems and sweepers and structure and tactics and so on. What's your own experience of that?
Yeah, so look, in the way that games are structured now and training sessions are structured now, like you could have a game like you could play a game, in preparation for a game, you could play a game against 8 fellas against 18. So those 8 fellas have solved their way through the game with playing against 18 players or 6 players against 12. So players are used to making decisions against opposition, whereas multi players and making decisions. So when I look at a pitch, I don't see how many numbers are on the pitch. I don't see that there's 7 backs or 8 backs. I just see grass, and I would see lines. It doesn't matter how many 8 or 9 players, there's always gaps somewhere. And I think one of the things then is trying to allow your players to see that a bit. So, I don't get into this debate about how many players are facing you or whether the sweepers are good or bad idea. The way the game is played now is entirely different than the way I played it when I was playing, when you had rigid 6 versus 6. So you just have to get on with it. You just have to, as a coach, play a game, So if you get out to the park with your minors, right, there's no problem having a game, lads. We're going to play tonight's game. You've only 15 players. Tonight we're going to play 6 against 9. Let's play a game. Let's see what happens. Now we're going to play 3 against 9. Yeah. Now we're going to play 5 against 8. Whatever number of players you have. Don't get hung up on playing 15 against 15 or 6 against 6, and you'll find your players will work out that really quickly.
I think from what you've spoken about, and there's a real interesting sort of development happening in coaching where historically we thought coaching was about rigidity and structure and lines and loads of cones and all that sort of stuff. And I'm really interested in what you spoke about chaos, because I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago on one of these previous calls that I read something about coaches working on the edge of chaos.
Yeah.
And how you look out onto a field and there's a coaching session going on, but it looks chaotic, but there's sort of order within the chaos as well.
Yeah, but who brings order into the chaos? It's the players bring order into the chaos. You can create chaos as a coach by the way you structure the teams or structure your session. And every team does this. This is not every elite team prepares for this in this way. And it's your players bring order to that in the way that they bring order to it. So you're operating at a level where again, this is at I think this shouldn't be seen as a reserve of your elite county teams. You can allow your players at whatever level, to have to deal with situations where they might have to keep control of the ball. And if they have the ball, they have to need to execute well if they have the high number of players. So this could be done at all levels, where you're not hidebound to sort of having a game equal against equal, and like so like I've seen really good coaches or coaching sessions where goals in the middle of the pitch and 2 games going on around that goal, you know what I mean, and players moving the ball and so on. And that's really there's some coaches doing really good work on that theme of sort of having non-structured sessions. So I think it's going on out there, you know what I mean. Now that's not to say that there are times when you really have to structure your sessions to get technical development or tactical development, as I said earlier. So I think it's a balance really between the two.
And I suppose essentially it's experience helps you to try and find that balance.
Yeah, it's experiencing your players, yeah, and it's looking around at what's working and who the market leaders in this, and looking around and seeing, you know, reflecting on what's going on in front of you on the pitch, and having variation and carrying the game in your head, you know, around as part of the best you can to allow you to do that, you know. And again, don't underestimate what I said earlier. You know, if you're in your nursery and you're inside an indoor hall, there's chaos in there. And you know, your young girl or young boy is finding their way through that, finding space, finding ability to strike the ball, getting stuck into it. You know, so this is not too novel. And the important thing is not to get away as we develop through the grades. Then not to get too far away from, not to become too structured. Then, but to allow all the time a little bit of sort of free play. You know what I mean? I think it's really important to allow that to develop, you know, because out of that comes the ability to do things quick, the ability to your technical development to improve. You know, if you're playing an uneven game and you have to win the ball, you'll find a way to win the ball. You know, because you know it's evolution. It's the survival of the fittest. So if your team demands you to win the ball with two players around you, you'll find a way. You know.
And we get a common question here about over the weeks about when you sort of move on from the fun stuff and onto the serious competitive stuff. But it strikes me from watching teams that you've been involved with over the years that they seem to really, really enjoy it. Now, maybe lots of us would hope that Tipperary players mightn't enjoy it as much as they seem to be, but it just seems to be something that it seems to be a really enjoyable experience for them to play.
Well, I think it's important. It's important it's important that our sessions have that level of enjoyment. Enjoyment comes from part of as you go up the line. Enjoyment at the start comes from a player feels comfortable in the surroundings. So you have young developing players at under 8, under 9s, 10s, that it's a fun environment in a way that they're learning and developing the game. As they go older, then there's a bit of competition comes into it. You know, over 14, it comes into it, and you build that in where competition comes to fun. You know, if you can have competition and fun at the same time. You know, we find a way, teams and human beings find a way to be competitive, but they also wanted to have an element of real challenge and that brings the fun element to it. The fun element is, as you get older, is related to the competition, and it's keeping that level of freshness to it, as you call it. But you know, all our sessions should have that element where there is challenge, because going back to what I said earlier, challenge is really, it's our ability to push ourselves to being the best we can, whatever level we're at. And that level is going to vary if you're involved, you know, as I said, if you're involved, whatever level you are, you know, but it involves you having that competition element. But never forget, you know, that kind of, I won't say the glory element. Danny Blanford is called, you know, the game is all about glory, but the game is all about to me is all about expression. As coaches, we have to nurture that expression. We have to corral that expression sometimes. But if we dampen it too much, like what is the game?
And again, you spoke about that little bit of intensity during every session, even if it was only 10 or 15 minutes. How and who brings that intensity to your sessions?
Well, this is a conversation that the managers have with you. So you don't, you know, again, go back to this is not done, you know, this is not all down to the individual, but sort of you decide at levels of where you need to bring that intensity, when you need to bring it in, the length of time you need to have it, because it's a judgment as to, you know, how long you can sustain this. But it is the element of supreme challenge. You know, and I'm not talking about intensity means that people are knocking heads off one another. It's about that ability, you know, how quick can you move the ball? How fast can you do it? You know, how good is your execution? All of that stuff, there has to be that element of challenge. And it's at the level, whatever level, this is not just for elite county teams. This is whatever level you're at. You know, as to what is the level, you know, if we're to win the junior championship this year, you know, what is the level of intensity we have to reach? and can we reach it for a certain amount of time, and that tells you. So this is certainly a repeat, not just people see intensity and say, oh, I wish we could do that, but we're all at different levels. It's what we can do within our own environment with the players that we have. Those of us who work at elite level are lucky to have the best players, and they can do things that we as coaches can't do. But working with players at various levels, allows us to push those players to the limits that they have for a certain amount of time. Because this can't be done all the time. And particularly for the coach, if you're trying to develop, if you're trying to bring intensive levels, you'll burn out fairly quick. If you're at this every night.
And I suppose following on from that, then the current situation for us is obviously really, really difficult for lots of coaches and lots of players. And a couple of our audience have told us that motivation is quite low for some of their players, especially maybe some teenage players. What advice might you have for coaching from a distance or staying in touch with players right now, or things maybe that you've done yourself over the last number of weeks?
Well, I suppose the first thing, and again, it's an important point maybe, and it's not related directly to the question. You've got to look after yourself first, and make sure that you're really in a good space, to as I said earlier, to stay in the, we always, as coaches, tell our players to stay in the now, and really important for yourself, I think, to really make sure that you're doing all you can, in a sense, to be really positive while being realistic. No point in me pining over when the championship's going to start, because that's not going to make the championship start any quicker. So I've got to make sure that whatever around is that I am improving first of all as a coach, and making sure. One thing that I would certainly do as a coach is make sure that I am trying to get better and try to understand not only the game we play, but other games. And then I think it's the players. Then I think it's trying to communicate that, and all clubs, I'd say, are probably talking about wall ball sessions and so on like that, and challenges and some really good things being done even in our own club here in Salt Lake, Mattacara, in my Tipperary club, Kilowan McDonald's, which is fantastic. A Twitter account in Kilowan McDonald's, for example, doing really good work, and all clubs are like this. So I think that's important. But it's also important that we communicate and allow our young players to communicate on social media platforms, like if it's Instagram, that we encourage our players, for example, to search and communicate, maybe outside even ourselves as coaches, for example. They might pick up stuff on Instagram and communication about games and about, conditioning that's going on that maybe doesn't need you as a coach, but you can direct them and say, yeah, why don't you do that to keep ticking over? And also, I would say, to make sure that the players are communicating with each other. This is meant to be clubs and communities, so trying to make sure that you're talking with they're talking with their peers, they're communicating with each other, encouraging that communication, encouraging that leadership, is giving them ownership of the situation, and also giving them that support that, look, be patient, also one-to-one communications, really good, have a chat, listen to them, but all focused on what you can do now, because really the best way is to have that focus, in my view, but also then to have that sense of there will be a jump at some stage, we will be back, and in the meantime it's really important to stay in communication with themselves or with their peers, because teams have to communicate. Use your WhatsApp group to keep really solid communication. Go back to what I said particularly about have conversations about the game, have fun, have nights where it's handed over to the groups to have fun within their groups, and so on like that. Keep connected, going back no more so, as I said earlier. And these are just ways, I suppose, to have that ownership about the situation we're in now. But keep calm, keep patient. You know, if you can't change it, you can't change it. But you can certainly do things now, and you can both learn and develop as a coach and learn and develop as a player. And you can encourage your players to learn and develop. For example, go back on the striking. So rather than, for example, you know, you could go back and say, why don't we pick out five different best 3 strikers you know, and get them to find little bits and clips themselves, look at those, have a chat to them about those things, you know, and use that kind of medium, whatever social media they use, to have a chat about that. Because you're choosing now to say, yeah, this is what I think is important. This is the players I want you to. This is the player I want you to look at. If it's a player in your own club or your own county, there are really good examples where you can encourage the players to do that, and not to get frustrated because you're not on the pitch and so on. But I do think clubs are doing a lot of good work at the moment. But keep yourself as a coach. Don't get frustrated about this. This is a situation beyond our control. We're living in really tricky times, and the best we can do is to be the best for each other, I would think.
Eamon, you've been really, really good with your time. We might just finish up with a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned like people have an opportunity now to sort of learn for themselves. Are there any resources or books or things maybe that you have used in the past that you would recommend?
Well, I suppose they don't come off the top of my head in the sense, you know, I think one of the things you're always learning, if you read fiction, right, or if you look at poetry, if you read a poetry book, pick a poem a day, right, and you go, you know, whether it's lots of players, so Invictus, the poem, if you look at, for example, you know, the last poem I read was a poem called Candles by I think it's Capafi, about making sure you're looking forward and making sure you're making the best of every day. Now, you could talk to your players about behaviours and making sure they're the best of every day till the cows come home. Read that poem, and you will, as a coach, you will learn a lot about. You don't have to read a full book. Just read the poem, and you will make sure that you should be looking forward instead of looking backwards. But I suppose the one thing that one book, I mean, CRUYFF'S, obviously, I quoted Cruyff earlier, his book, The Inner Game of Tennis, by Timothy Galloway, is a lovely book which allowed me to understand. I don't have any expertise in the mind or psychology. I've learned a lot from people that I've worked with in various teams. But his book, Timothy Galloway's book, The Inner Game of Tennis, allowed me to think about flow and so on like that, and think about inner belief and so on. And I unfortunately lent it to Shane McGrath, so if Shane is on the call, he should give it back to me at some stage. But I learned an awful lot about sport from that, and you know, look, wherever you can find it, I would say, whatever makes it. And as I said, even looking at the Michael Jordan piece, you know, you learn. So learn from wherever you can pick it up, and I think that's really important. And I also think it's important, and I think that it's important that, I didn't say earlier, but I think mentoring is a really important part of the coaching process. I think we can learn from each other, but we can also learn from people who've been through a fair bit, you know. And I think that clubs should think a lot more about how they utilize experience within their clubs, and have mentoring programs. I think we could do an awful lot more with that, you know, and in a sense, you know, I'm lucky at the moment to work with really fantastic coaches that I'm learning from them, and it's a cross process, for example, at the moment, and I think it's really important for our clubs that we utilize the experience within our clubs, that, you know, people who've been through maybe 20, 30 years of experience, they have still a lot to offer. So mentoring, in my view, is a really part of the learning process. You don't always have to find it outside your club. It may be staring you in the face.
And last couple of questions then. Advice that you received previously that you really value now. Do you recall any piece?
Well, I suppose one thing is that in the job I do, right, one of the things you learn very early is that there are thousands of people better than you in your work, you know, and therefore, you know, you're learning all the time. You read, like my book, if I read a paper, you know, and I say, wow, you look at a paper and you say, that's a really impressive paper. So I learn from that. And similarly in sport, I look around me and I learn. If I look at all the sort of elite coaches around the place, even in hurling now, and you can learn. So learning is the critical dimension that it never stops. It never stops. You know, from day one you go down as maybe a dad or a mum go down with your young lad or young girl, and you're on the coaching thing. If you have an openness to learning, and an openness to learning every time you're in there, it's a really important part of the process, and that to me is the most important lesson. And I've learned from some fantastic coaches and fantastic managers. So starting with my old club at Kilroy McDonough, and you know, learning all the time, even when I didn't know I was learning. You know, and very often you don't know you're learning, but if you're listening and if you're open, and this is a really important part of, I think, and you know, and that to me is really, I suppose, the advice I'd give to any coach, young or old, that is a really important part of that learning process. Oh, sorry, of the coaching process.
Okay, Eamon, I think we've taken enough of your time. You've been really good with your time today and over the last couple of weeks, as myself and Martin Fogarty and yourself have been preparing for this, and we really appreciate it. We're very grateful for it. The reaction from the audience has been fantastic, and there's been a huge number of comments and responses and queries and stuff like that. So thank you very much on behalf of everybody on the call.
Thank you.
For everybody on the call, we're continuing this series on Thursday this week. We have a session with Shane Mangan, and that will look at it from a Gaelic football perspective. At the session is called the tactical periodization of Gaelic football. So Shane is a really young, innovative coach that is doing an awful lot of work and research as part of his PhD in the Tala Institute of Technology at the moment. So there'll be a really modern and a really up-to-date set of information there for everybody. He's just finishing up the PhD research right now. So the registration for that is open right now on the GAA Learning webpage if you want to go and register for that session. And as you recall, please put in the correct email address for yourself, because the link will be sent to your email address. And if you put in the wrong address, we won't have any way of trying to find one for you. So please just check when you're entering that you put in the correct address. So thanks to everyone for coming on the call tonight, and we wish you a good evening, and we'll hopefully chat to you again on Thursday.